Think of two completely opposing approaches to football. Did your mind immediately jump to high possession approaches versus low possession approaches? Catenaccio versus attacking football. Sure, those are opposites, but they're also predictable opposites. And we've seen that story 1,000 times. One team hoards the ball and the other sits deep and counters. What's far more fascinating is what happens when two teams want exactly the same thing: total control of the ball and the opponent. But their visions on how to achieve that couldn't be more different. When both teams refuse to sit back, when both demand to dictate the game, and when both sides are committed to showing their football philosophy is the apex, you get a clash that is about so much more than the final scoreline. This is the story of December 22nd, 2023, when those two visions collided on one of the biggest stages in club football. On one side, Guardiola, the meticulous composer, who has written every note in advance, conducting his players through a symphony perfected over the years. Every movement planned, every pass premeditated, and every position calculated to create a perfect math equation on the grass. On the other, Fernando Diniz, the jazz conductor who gives his musicians the freedom to improvise collectively in real time. Where Guardiola writes his sheet music, Diniz gives his players the freedom to create jazz in real time. Where Guardiola demands precision, Diniz embraces beautiful chaos. The fixture read Manchester City versus Fluminense, but the real contest was between positionism and relationism, two entire schools of tactical thought competing for the biggest trophy. From the start of the match, Manchester City knew they were facing something they hadn't seen before. I mean, look at this sequence. It starts off normal enough, a midfielder splitting the centre-backs and the second pivot coming across to support the centre-back and the left-back. Standard stuff. But in the space of a few seconds, Fluminense makes several high-risk passes until we arrive at this extraordinary situation. Half their team crowded around the ball, occupying less than 10% of the pitch. Where are the structured passing lanes that modern football demands? Where's the systematic progression through the thirds? Where is the optimal spacing between players that every modern coach craves? To most viewers, it looks chaotic, but this is relationism in its purest, most unadulterated form. Now contrast this with how City approached their build-up when Fluminense pressed high up. Every time Ederson received the ball, you could almost predict the subsequent City shape with certainty. Ederson drifts wider, allowing Stones to step into the midfield. Ake provides the width out on the left. Rodri drops to support Stones, and that trademark midfield box begins to form. And it's not just the shape that's predictable. Take a look at this. Many a time, when Fluminense were pressing, City even began their play with near enough the same pass. This is positionism in its purest form, the beautiful predictability of a system so refined that it operates like clockwork. If positionism is about the manager dictating as many moves as possible, is relationism simply about putting the players out on the pitch to do whatever they want? That's the misconception that makes relationism seem like tactical anarchy. This encounter showed that there's a method to Diniz's madness. When positional teams like Guardiola's create overloads around the ball, they typically seek a +1 advantage, matching the opposition's numbers and adding one extra player. The free man can then exploit the numerical superiority and begin to progress the attack. Here's a textbook example for City, a clean 4 versus 3 with just one extra man. Notice how even with the ball in play, City's structure remains rather disciplined, no sudden clustering, and no players abandoning their zones to crowd the ball. But Fluminense are playing a different game entirely when they're on the ball. They don't want just one extra man around it. Look at this situation. Fluminense already enjoy a 5 versus 4 numerical advantage around the ball, but watch what happens next. More and more players continue dropping to provide additional options, even when they already have the advantage. They're not seeking a +1 advantage, they're seeking overwhelming local superiority. Why would they deliberately overcrowd one area of the pitch? After all, the perfectly coordinated and measured out vertical structures of positionalism allow the minimum number of players to be committed deep, to allow as many players as possible to remain higher up to receive the ball. Well, here's what Fluminense understood that most teams don't. Against high-pressing teams like Manchester City, taking risks in possession and looking vulnerable can quickly become your biggest strengths. It allows for situations like this, where City begin with 2 players committed to the direct press around the ball, a manageable situation for most teams. But the deep clustering of Fluminense acts like a magnet, drawing more and more men in blue towards the ball. 2 becomes 3, 3 becomes 4, and by the time Lewis gets drawn in, Fluminense have achieved something remarkable. They've removed exactly half of Manchester City's outfield players from their defensive structure, and if they're able to escape this situation, acres of green grass are the reward. And here's the thing that makes Fluminense's approach to the beautiful game so interesting. You will often see them take on suicidal risks such as this. Or even this. And that's because, strangely enough, the more danger Fluminense is in when they're in possession, the more danger the opponent is in, because the more men they commit to the press, the more gaps that are there to be exploited. And the drawing of the opponent into a concentrated zone is something that they also look to do horizontally, clustering most of their side in one zone to then allow the switch. And we see it being executed flawlessly here again, with Fluminense committing men to support the right back on the ball. It means by the time the goalkeeper receives the ball, 6 City men are high and to the left. So by the time the dropping winger on the opposite side of the pitch receives the ball, an incredible 8 City players are the wrong side of it. And the funny thing is, there were 2 distinct occasions when Fluminense looked least effective in possession. The first was scenario A, and what do you notice about it? Fluminense are in the ball in deeper zones, looking to draw City high up the pitch. But, for the most part, City prioritize maintaining their defensive structure and simply refuse to engage with Fluminense, meaning that their defensive shape did not collapse, and Fluminense are unable to draw City into the press. And eventually, City do win the ball back. But we also had scenario B, where rather than trusting their usual slow build-up play to first lure City in, Fluminense looked to be much more vertical before fully drawing in the likes of the double pivot. So, because City is still well structured, by the time they look for that vertical pass, a turnover is the result. So what we can see now is that Fluminense do have broad principles, take risks to get men around the ball and create space elsewhere on the pitch. Their goal is not just to let players do whatever they want on the ball. And this stands in stark contrast to City's approach here, where we see their midfield maintaining their rough box structure. And while City certainly do get numbers around the ball to support the man, it's primarily done within the confines of their structure. Notice what doesn't happen. When the ball moves to City's left, you won't see Walker abandoning the right flank or Bernardo drifting across from right wing to offer support. Each player maintains their zone, trusting the system to create the necessary advantage, and eventually this allows Walker to get on the ball as he had maintained his position and becomes the free man once Fluminense are dragged across. This shows the fundamental difference in their philosophies. Fluminense use the physical spaces occupied by their actual players to move their opponent, whereas Manchester City use the ball and their structure to maneuver opponents around the pitch. Both approaches work, but they demand completely different relationships between the players, the ball, and the very concept of a position. So if relationism can create such problems for elite teams, why hasn't it become more widespread? Well, it's because positional play does have a load of advantages. The first is by having players in roughly predefined positions in specific game situations, it allows automatisms to begin to form. These are those instant, almost telepathic understandings between teammates that make complex moves look effortless. Take a look at some of Fluminense's build-up situations that we spoke about prior. In each one, the shape is unique, the support players are different, and the options available to the ball carriers are constantly changing. This places an enormous cognitive load on every player. They must read the situation, identify their teammates, and where they are at this time. And as a result, they always have to process multiple options and execute the right pass under pressure. And this can lead to scenarios like this, where the man receives the ball, he has to take a touch, get his head up to scan the pitch because he doesn't know where his teammates are this time. This slight hesitation can be absolutely lethal. Contrast this with Stones receiving the ball under pressure for City. Yes, he's under physical pressure, but mentally he's operating in familiar territory. With his eyes closed, he already knows where every one of his teammates should be positioned relative to his location. So his decision-making process isn't about choosing from infinite possibilities, it's about selecting the optimal option from a limited, predictable set. This allows him to focus entirely on execution rather than decision-making. The difference becomes crucial when margins are tight and the pressure is intense. And here's another massive advantage of positional play. When they do play against a team whose defensive structure plays into their hands, they become truly devastating. And that's exactly what happened in this encounter. The 3-box-3 was almost custom made to hurt the Brazilian side, especially because in their 4-4-2 defensive shape, they were not passive with the forwards looking to sit on the pivots. Instead, those forwards looked to push up onto the centre-backs. This meant that City's structure created the potential for a 3 versus 2 overload in the first phase and a 4 versus 2 in the midfield, as well as a potential 5 versus 4 against the backline when the midfielders moved into the half spaces. Not a good situation for the Brazilians. City often pushed their centre-backs wide, forcing the Fluminense winger to engage, and this would make midfield entry much easier. And now the 4 versus 2 or the 4 versus 3 would mean that they had the potential to find a man between the lines. The result was that City could progress into the final third consistently without taking the risks that Fluminense's approach demanded. But it was in the attacking third where the systematic positioning truly separated the teams. Almost invariably, when City established possession in the final third, they settled into their signature 3-2-5 shape. The free 8s occupied the half spaces, creating systematic problems for any team defending with a back 4. This shape presents defenders with an impossible choice. The fullback must pick up 2 players simultaneously, stay narrow and give the winger space out wide, or step out early and leave the dangerous gaps in the half space. Both options have devastating consequences when executed with City's precision. And again, we come back to the idea of automatisms and the advantages of predetermined movements. When the fullback initially stays narrow, the winger receives in space with a clear picture. The automatism dictates that the free 8 will make a run into the half space, and if this run gets tracked, typically by the fullback tucking in or a midfielder dropping back, it creates the room for the winger to drive infield. But the more lethal scenario occurs when the half space run goes untracked. The winger can then immediately find his teammate, who can then drive into the cutback zone, drawing the centre-back out of position and creating high-value scoring opportunities. We see this systemic destruction for City's final goal. City established their usual midfield shape, and the moment the ball reaches the winger, Nunes automatically makes the run behind the fullback. This draws the centre-back across, creating the space that Alvarez exploits for the finish. And the second goal demonstrates the opposite scenario perfectly. The fullback gets drawn to the winger early, creating a massive gap between him and his centre-back partner, with City's midfield superiority forcing a Fluminense midfielder to press Rodri. Because the structure is so ingrained, Rodri knows where his teammates are. The fullback is on the winger, so that must mean that the man in the half space is free, and he slides the ball into Foden, leading to the goal. But there is another glaring problem with Dini's approach, and perhaps the fundamental reason relationism has yet to fully go mainstream. If you ask most managers whether they want to be highly structured when they're in possession, you would get a mixture of answers. But if you ask them if they want to be highly structured out of possession, the vast majority would say yes. Even Fluminense in this game, when out of possession for long spells, defaulted to a highly compact and very clear 4-4-2. But the problem is, Fluminense cannot just instantly morph from this highly unstructured in-possession play to highly structured defensive play in the out-of-possession phase. There is a very ugly and very important in-between transitional phase. See, when attacking, positional teams tend to maintain relatively even spacing, and roughly speaking will maintain their positions with support for the man in possession only coming from nearby teammates, meaning that it's much rarer to get into those situations where half the team is clumped in one zone of the pitch. So this combination of overall structure, but support around the ball, means that when a positional team loses the ball, they have the immediate numbers to immediately counterpress and try to win it back early. But here's the key. The overall structure means that their rest defense is well taken care of. So even if the immediate press is escaped, there is a second layer of defense to protect them. But Fluminense's commitment to swarming the ball creates a completely different problem. Just look at this disaster in the very first minute. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 players are concentrated in this zone. When Marcelo's pass goes wrong, City don't need some intricate passing move to get into a dangerous zone. There's basically half a football pitch with nobody in it. So when Ake intercepts, it's like he has an invitation to stroll forwards and take a shot, and this does lead to the opener. And this wasn't an isolated event. Every time Fluminense moved into a hyper-overload, if City won the ball back, it was far too easy to immediately rip through the heart of Fluminense. What we witnessed on this day showed the beauty of football. There is no such thing as a correct or incorrect way of playing football. We saw the magic of allowing players freedom and the devastation of a well-oiled machine. It's fair to say that positional play is currently in vogue, in large part thanks to this man. Positional play and relationism are just the tip of the iceberg of what we cover in Tactical Mastery, which is my program designed to teach you tactical analysis from the ground up, and you can find it in the first link in the description. If you want to make 2025-26 the season that you start watching football like an analyst, Tactical Mastery is the perfect place for you. Inside the program, you get access to over 13 hours of content that begins with the fundamentals of analysis and builds you brick by brick until you can instantly see the tactical battles being fought by elite teams. And that's not all. You also have access to a community of other analysts who are honing their craft, with the background of members ranging from beginners all the way to UEFA qualified coaches, as this is the community for all analysis lovers. If that sounds like you, check it out through the link in the description below. To take a deeper look at how he's helped shape the modern game, check out this video.